in January or February of 2002. I, a female, had just turned 21 and was living with my father in Ohio. For context, I was extremely naive and living in a pretty directionless life. I'd grown up in an affluent area of Seattle, went to private school, gone on to college, and dropped out. I was dealing with major depression and partying a lot, hanging with the wrong crowd, hooking up with random strangers. My mom didn't know what to do with me, so she sent me to live with my dad across the country in Columbus. Now, I'd been living in Ohio with my dad and pretty much lived like an entitled teenager. I did have a job in retail, but other than that, I sat around, didn't do much. My dad is an alcoholic, and he didn't help much either. At some point, seeing him passed out in the living room one morning and working a dead-end job kind of got me to wanting to return home to Seattle. My mom was unwilling to let me live with her again. I called my best friend at the time. Her mom was like family. They didn't have a lot of money either, but they bought me a bus and a train ticket back home. They said I could stay with them until I got back on my feet. I was relieved. My dad was sad to see me go, but he agreed to drop me off at the bus station downtown. The thing is, he had to take me before his work shift. My bus didn't leave until later in the afternoon, so I'd basically have to wait from 9 a.m. until we boarded. My dad was very nervous about leaving me there. He warned me that this station was in a rough part of Columbus. Okay, all of Columbus is rough, and yeah, I needed to be very careful. I'm thinking, yeah, okay. I was totally oblivious. Dad drove me to the Greyhound station. It was a few surrounded by people waiting for their buses, a few stragglers outside the entrance. It was cold outside that day. Inside the bus terminal, it was pretty empty. Dad helped bring all my luggage inside, 2 large suitcases containing all of my possessions. If I didn't want to be dragging them around with me all day, I had to pay to store them in a locker by the desk. I couldn't remember exactly how much, but I was broke and couldn't spare money for that. I looked wearily at the clock. My dad looked at me with sadness. I could tell he was worried about me traveling by myself. I hugged him and tried to look as confident as possible. We said our goodbyes, and he left. I've traveled numerous times, made several trips by plane by myself. I've traveled to various countries with groups. I was not adverse to adventure. What I was not good at was reading people. I genuinely saw the good in everyone and had never had a negative experience, even at 4 a.m. in downtown Seattle. If you know anything about Seattle, it's a robust public transportation system, and I was no stranger to weirdos, drunk people, and hostile exchanges between people on the bus. I usually just ignore people or continue walking. In this situation, I felt like I was totally in my element as I'd taken public transportation many times alone. Back to the Greyhound station, I decided to go outside and have a cigarette. The conundrum was that I had to keep an eye on my 2 suitcases. I positioned them near the front desk in such a way that I could see them clearly from the front entrance. I then head outside to get my nicotine fix. I stand off to the right of the front door. I'm smoking and trying to shuffle through my extremely cheap and very ugly purse, which contained my passport, because I was totally irresponsible and lost my driver's license. As I'm shuffling around, a man with a large knitted hat asked me for a cigarette. I glance at him. Sure thing, I say. I hand him one and get a light. We chat briefly, and I study his face. He's not unattractive, not scary looking, maybe a little disheveled, but I couldn't tell if he was homeless. No immediate red flags. I felt as the outside of the terminal was littered with people, some smoking like me, others walking briskly to their destinations. Notably, an older gentleman is standing opposite me on the left side of the entrance. As I'm talking to the man in the hat, this older gentleman seems to be staring at me intently. You'll understand why soon. Man in the hat asks where I'm from. As I'm catching a bus, he comments on the cold. In passing, I casually lament that I am running low on smokes. He looks at me and says, "Oh, there's a gas station just around the corner. You can get some from there." I think this through for a moment. My bus wouldn't come for hours. I could easily grab a pack and be back in time. Something stops me, however, as I remember my luggage sitting unattended. I said I'll think about it, and turned to get back inside. Hours pass. Every once in a while, I go back outside to smoke. Man in hat seems to be there every time, At one point, he mentions the gas station again. "It's just right there. I can take you." Again, I decline. And it's not because I'm scared. It's because I'm worried about my luggage. I go back inside. The last time I go outside, the street is eerily quiet. No one there. I grab another cigarette and place my purse on the ground at my feet. I look up. Man in the hat is there. He asks for money. This is where my gut finally turns and I feel uneasy. I say I don't have much, and I can't help him. I hurriedly finish my cigarette as I'm suddenly very aware that my purse is laying next to my feet, exposed. I lean over quickly to pick it up and mumble something about going back inside. As I raise up, Man in the Hat reaches out and grabs my purse and says, "Let me help you with that." My body seems to drain itself, and I immediately grab my purse closer to me. "I'm good," I say. Man in the Hat suddenly switches from harmless random dude into nasty thief. "Give me the purse, you bitch," he hisses. He says it through clenched teeth, like he's trying to be quiet. I'm struggling against him now, desperate as I realize no one is here to help me. I start screaming, "Help!" Man in Hat is shoving me with his hip and pushes me up against a wall. "Shut the fuck up!" I'm desperate now. This guy could easily pull out a knife and shank me, or punch me. I cling to my purse and hope to God the cheap handles hold together. His hands are on top of mine, and he shoves me again, calling me a bitch. I scream louder. From my left, I suddenly hear, "Are you okay?" I remember the older gentleman from earlier. He seemingly steps out of nowhere and loudly asks what's going on. I shove Man in Hat hard with my left thigh and think he's realized at that moment that if he did anything to me, he could be identified. He lets go of my purse and runs off. I'm shaking, and I run tearfully inside, leaving the older gentleman outside. I was too frightened to say thank you. I spent the rest of that day hovering by the front desk. I was terrified. I thought of the 3-day trip ahead of me and shook with dread. I held my purse in my hands with a vice grip. When my time finally came to board the bus to the train, I glanced in terror over the other passengers. No way was I sitting next to anyone. Every person became a potential criminal. I slumped into a seat and cowered by the window. I then heard a voice behind me. "I was going to warn you," said the voice. I whipped my head around. There was the older gentleman, casually sitting behind me, eyes probably looking as large as dinner plates. "I knew he was targeting you. You need to be more careful out here." I tearfully thanked him. We just stared out the window and nodded. We didn't speak again after that. That moment changed my life. My struggle with Man in Hat must have taken only 30 seconds, but the repercussions last even 20 years later. I think back to how adamant Man in Hat was about me going around the corner to the gas station. My hair still stands on end when I think about it. Would he have robbed me over a few measly dollars in my purse? Murdered me? Raped me? Who knows? It chills my blood to think about it. I spent the next 3 days paranoid and unwilling to leave my luggage unattended. I clung to my purse and used it as a pillow on the train when laying down. When I used the bathroom, I rolled my luggage into the tiny bathroom with me. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. In the chilling contrast, the train trip was quiet and uneventful. Staring out the window as we entered Washington State, the snowfall and evergreen trees weighed down by heavy snow, and I was no longer the naive and reckless young woman at the Greyhound station. I was a changed person. Man in the Hat at the Greyhound station? Let's never meet again. I don't even know how to begin this. To be honest, I was only able to puzzle what happened a few months ago. I guess I'll start from where I believe is the beginning, but I can't assure you it was the first time I saw him. I'll keep the details pretty vague regarding where this happened so as to not dox myself. I know I have pictures of my face on Reddit, but I don't feel comfortable sharing my name or the specific city I lived in at the time. Let's just say that it is a European city, very central and cosmopolitan. When I was about 15 years old, I was extremely interested in philosophy books. I didn't feel like I could talk about them to my friends about the subject without boring them. So when this man approached me on the street with a pamphlet about Plato classes, I was pretty excited. He was about 28 to 30 years old, very tall, skinny, and crazy eyes. I remember I was a smartass and thought that reading 2 of his most well-known books made me interesting, so we started debating. It was a nice conversation. and lasted about 10 minutes, but it was getting late, so I left it at that. He told me his name, but I honestly cannot remember it. A couple of days after, I found him on the same street, at a totally different time. I was always very crowded, so I wasn't especially spooked about it. I was getting out of the subway after classes. Mind you, I took this route every day until I graduated high school. I didn't live on that street, and that's where I got out of the subway and waited for the bus that would come and get me home. I thought it was a cool coincidence that the philosophy guy was at the subway door. This time, he didn't have any pamphlets. He had a lollipop in his hand, and I know that sounds cliche, but it was so eerie to see a 6-foot guy just sucking a lollipop and looking straight at me. He just said hi, I said hi back, and he tried to get the conversation going, but I could feel this weird energy in the air, so I just decided to cut the conversation short. I'd see him once or twice a week, and I just assumed he lived there and happened to be going for a walk at the same time as I was getting home. I honestly believe this weird guy, twice my age, just happened to find his way to me so many times. That is, until I saw him in my neighborhood. I was having a coffee with a friend, and she was telling me that she met this cool guy while playing volleyball on the beach, when the guy, I shit you not, just appeared out of nowhere. He approached my friend, and they talked for a bit. Yes, he was the guy she was just talking about. He seemed mildly surprised that we were friends, but didn't give it much thought, so I didn't either. When he left, I started feeling uneasy, but my friends thought he was cool, so I didn't voice my concerns. There's this thing about teenage girls that makes them think they're very mature for their age, so we just assumed he had befriended us separately, and then found out we were friends. At the time, none of us had social media, apart from WhatsApp, so I still can't understand how he managed to insert himself into my friend group. Eventually, my friend left to study abroad, and the subject died. I would see the dude now and then, on that same street of my commute, but we would only speak for a few minutes, and that's it. This went on for about 6 months. Sometimes he would pretend he didn't know who I was, but would still approach me, saying that I looked familiar. Sometimes he would greet me very warmly. Looking back, I guess he was dealing with some kind of mental health problem of his own. Slowly, he was getting bolder. One time, he asked for my number and tried to hug me. I could feel that something was very wrong, but at the same time, I thought I was being the weird one, and he was just a nice dude. Still, I gave him a fake number, just in case. This other time, we went to a church on a school trip, and he was waiting outside, talking to my peers. He played it cool, saying that he had seen my face somewhere, but was not sure, as if he hadn't been seeing me almost every week for a year now. It was very stupid. I never thought about talking to my parents about this. After all, the guy was not violent. He was not mean. In my head, it was just a lonely man who happened to have seen a strangely similar routine to me. I started to be scared, though. I'd look behind my back when I was alone at night. I'd avoid dark streets. I was kind of paranoid, but still, I ignored my gut feeling and shoved it in the back of my mind. After all, as long as I gave him a few minutes of my day when he called out for me, everything would be fine. When I turned 17, I stopped seeing him. I think this went on for about a year. It was a relief, honestly. I could sense that what happened was bizarre, but I'd explain it to my friends like it was funny, like it was a joke. Eventually, I started attending college, so my everyday route changed. I stayed in the same city, though. One day, I had to go through that same street again. I can't remember why. I just know that I was walking, minding my own business. It was maybe 9 p.m., and then I turned around the corner, and there he was. He saw me, smiled, and said he was lost. Asked for directions, and I swear to God, I felt primal fear at that moment. I felt I was dealing with a truly insane person, because we had crossed each other's paths for 2 years straight in this exact same place, and he was acting as if he didn't know me, or the intersection. Something about that fucked with my mind for a while. I just kept walking. I didn't look at him, didn't utter a single word. And then he lost his shit. For the first time, I saw what he really was. He tried to grab my arm and screamed that I was the biggest bitch ever. He said that he hoped my mom died of cancer. He said he would kill me. I know I was not alone, as there was still quite a lot of people outside, but no one said anything. He kept screaming his lungs out, and I just started running. I ran, and I cried. That was the last time I ever saw him. 2 years ago now. He has long since stopped talking to my friend. No one knows who he is. I can't even remember his name to go to the police and file a report. It's like my mind tried to erase him. He was a stellar stalker, though, because I only understood that's what he was years after the fact. I'm just grateful I'm safe, and I never want to meet him again. When I was about 24, I was always busy with work, and I lived in a small historic town. So needless to say, I didn't get out much. Which is why I was so excited when my 30-something cousin came up from Fresno to visit. I was also excited when she wanted to go out to check out the scene on the first night that she stayed with me. As it turns out, she was a drinker, so we headed out to hit up a few small bars in my town. We only ended up finding one bar that was kind of happening. It had a pool table, plus it allowed smoking inside, so we were sold. I decided to sit at the bar, and my cousin headed off to play pool with some guys. As I'm sitting at the bar, sipping my drink and checking my phone, I get a tap on my shoulder. I turn to see an older gentleman, whom I didn't recognize right away. Seeing my puzzled look, he exclaims, "It's me, Cody's dad." And then I instantly realized he is the father of a boy I had dated in like the 8th grade when I was about 14. His dad seemed nice enough, but I did remember that he was a pretty stern character back then. Sometimes, as a punishment for his son, he would have him dig trenches, and even in the summertime, in the hard-pan rocky ground. I could even remember hanging out at his house back in the day, and just getting a bad feeling about his dad, though I never experienced anything around his dad that would justify that feeling. So of course, I was surprised he even recognized me at all those years later. He bought me a drink, and we started catching up a little. As we were talking, my cousin comes over to check in with me, upon seeing a much older man at the bar speaking with me. Eventually, he suggested that we go outside to smoke, since the bar was getting pretty smoky. Once we were outside, though, I realized we were pretty much alone. This was fine, I figured, since he was always one of my distant neighbors I had known off and on over the years. But I figured wrong. I began to understand that as he started asking me more and more personal questions. He started asking me about whether or not I had a boyfriend, or if he'd ever considered dating an older man. I started getting uncomfortable, so I suggested that we go back in where it was a bit warmer. But again, after a few minutes, he wanted to go back outside. At that point, though, I was already trying to blow him off politely. My cousin was seeing all this since she was walking over again to check in with me. She gave me a sort of warning look before turning and walking back to her game of pool. As the night progressed, he continued to try to get me to go back outside with him. This time, though, he wanted me to go to his truck. Finally, he grabbed my arm and just tried pulling me outside with him. Thank God for my cousin. She seemed to materialize out of nowhere, and she grabbed my other arm yelling, "Fuck off," to him. He immediately backed right off and disappeared into the small crowd toward the back exit. For the rest of that night, we enjoyed ourselves and had some much-needed fun. It wasn't until about 6 months later that I heard a horrifying story about him from another neighbor. I was told that he was in prison, probably for life. Apparently, he had been stalking and watching his soon-to-be ex-wife at their former home for months. Eventually, he decided to straight-up kidnap her, tying her up and gagging her. He then put her in his truck, or back seat or something, and drove her down towards Mexico. In Los Angeles, he decided they should stop for the night, as it was about an 8-hour drive from our hometown. All night on that stay, he repeatedly raped, beat, and tortured her. He had apparently told her that he was taking her to Mexico to kill her. He had been treating her that way for years. I knew upon hearing that my bad feeling as a kid was justified. I'm now getting chills just writing this part. Somehow, though, she managed to escape his brutality that night. He was arrested pretty quickly after that. So Ken, who tried to get me alone outside the bar that night to do God knows what, let's not ever meet again, you sick fuck. Hi everyone. This incident happened about 5 years ago. This is a story that I never really tell anymore, because most people are either uncomfortable hearing it or make well-meaning comments about what I should have done in this situation, without really understanding how differently your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic. But you guys seem to get it, so here's my story. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time, around 4:30 p.m., unlocked my door, and went inside. I set my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island, hearing my heavy metal front door swing shut loudly behind me, and began taking care of some errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was habit for me to not lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyway. I have never forgotten to lock my door once in the 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and onto my large walk-in closet and began hanging up the laundry that I'd started earlier in the day before work. My front door opened, and I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early, and I was happily calling out to him. "I'm in here, love." I was met with silence, and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of something is wrong crawl up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking my husband simply hadn't heard me, and walked out into the living room kitchen area, and standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a complete stranger. He was male, older than me, I would estimate 50s, but it's hard for me to recall exact facial features or details from this moment, and he was just standing there, staring at me. No ski mask, no weapon, just watching me. I wondered if he'd maybe walk into the wrong apartment and was going to apologize and leave. But as he continued to stare, I realized I needed to do something other than just gape at this stranger in my house. I stood taller, puffed up my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small woman, and used a loud, clear voice, telling him to get the hell out of my apartment. He had no business being here. He completely ignored me, like I hadn't even spoken. Then he began to pick up my things, my cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them into his own pockets. That's when it truly hit me that this person was dangerous, and I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake until that moment. I darted forward toward the only other device I had that would let me get help, my computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but still had about 12-15 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me, and I sprinted back toward the bathroom because it was the only place I could go, and put 2 locked doors between us, my bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds I could hear him messing with it, trying to open it. I ran into the closet and locked that door too, opening my computer and getting on Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent message after message pleading him to call 911 and tell him there was an intruder in the apartment. He got the message within minutes and assured me that he had a dispatcher on the phone and was leaving work himself to try and get there and help me if he could. I waited and waited. The bathroom door opened and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and started trying to break that door down too. Here's the part where people usually start giving me advice on how I should have acted, but all I can tell you is that I was frozen, with fear, with shock. I don't know, but I didn't scream or cry or search for a weapon in that dark closet. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just kneeled in my closet, waited to die, because I knew that's what was going to happen to me. People like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely if I'd screamed, someone would have heard and come to my help. Surely there was something heavy enough in my closet to use to defend myself. Hell, even the laptop I had would hurt if I swung it at someone. Why didn't I do anything? I don't really have an answer for that. But the closet door held, Miraculously, I heard frustrated footsteps go back out into the living room area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering, my drawers and refrigerator and cabinets being flung open as things were torn out of them. I continued to sit in that closet, silently crying, wanting to leave, but feeling that death was inevitable. I feel awful about my selfishness in that moment, but I messaged my mom, who lived a 15-hour drive away, and told her what was happening. I desperately wanted comfort and to tell her how much I love her. I'm not a parent, but I could only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her through knowing her daughter was in danger and there was nothing she could do to help. She messaged me constantly, begging me to keep replying. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers I loved them, to help my husband through whatever happened next if it ended that way, that badly, and I hope it to God that it wouldn't. The intruder started messing with the closet door again, mumbling disjointed words that I couldn't really distinguish. I remember hoping that the police would get to the apartment before my husband, that he wouldn't have to be the one to find me in whatever state this invader left me in. The front door opened again, and it was my husband, shouting for me. The intruder walked out toward the living room/kitchen area again, where my front door was located, and I opened the door and darted from the closet to find my husband on the ground with him, pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling, at times yelling, but never really putting up much resistance. This entire part is a blur for me. I remember feeling like the room was spinning, filled with fear, mostly for my husband at this point. Eventually, the police found the apartment. It took them 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that. But from the time my husband dialed 911 to the time officers arrived, it was 25 excruciatingly long minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way. It just always seemed like this was an unusually long response time for a home invasion. Then I got my things back from the man and took him out of my apartment. I numbly went through the process of filling out a police report, telling them what happened. One of the officers commented that I should really keep my door locked at all times. I remember feeling like he was being insensitive at the time, or blaming me for what happened, but later recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he has seen this situation end differently for other women. Within 30 minutes, the scariest incident of my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, the anxiety of having someone intrude into my space for years. If it happened to me once, it could happen again. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Please consider continuing because this isn't all doom and gloom. If this or something similar has happened to you and you're still struggling with the aftermath of it, the sleepless nights, the laying awake listening for sounds of forced entry, the nightmares, the constant checking and rechecking your locks, this is what eventually helped me. A year after this took place, my husband and I moved to the Midwest for his job. We selected a safe town with a nice apartment complex and chose a third-floor apartment with only one point of entry. I looked up every statistic on crime for the neighborhood, finding that an isolated incidence of car theft was the only thing reported in decades. I still couldn't sleep at night. It was definitely better than staying in the same apartment in Memphis, but my husband often works night shifts now, and I simply couldn't continue being terrified to sleep at night. I realized my biggest fear wasn't that something could happen again, but that if it did, I was just as unprepared now as I was then. I hadn't changed anything other than locking my door, and I knew I'd be likely to freeze up again and leave my life up to being able to hide well enough or having a door hold long enough to save me, and that was unacceptable. I walked into a martial arts school with an excellent self-defense program, and after introducing myself and talking to my instructor, he, who was both incredibly kind and incredibly insightful, helped me slowly build up my confidence and brought me out of my bubble of fear. After several months of training, I finally shared my reason for taking classes with him, and he's worked with me tirelessly to give me the ability to protect myself in any environment. So I've been training for years now, and the difference it has made me in every aspect of my life is unbelievable. The meek, quiet girl that waited to die in her closet doesn't exist anymore. I'm confident, I'm strong, and I'm worthy of living and protecting myself in my home. I no longer am ashamed of how I handled the situation, but I also understand what steps I can take to ensure that I am safe. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was worth it. I recognize this might not be a solution or option for everyone, Your experience is valid, and however you choose to cope with your own story is the right choice. This is how I happen to do it, and it's worked for me. But for all those people who read this and listen and think that they can get away with taking advantage of women, attacking them in their homes, and attempting to do God knows what's to them, let's never meet and know there are people like me out there waiting for you.